My time has come.
Impossible!
No, I'm Iron Man.
When China lost the Alaskan War, which I'm pretty sure my girlfriend, who claims Alaska is a real place, has never been more jazzed, but the chest pumping over this would not last very long. The entire planet would go eerily quiet at the conclusion of this war. See, everyone at this point was attempting to shift towards nuclear energy to run vehicles, houses, and gaming consoles to play GTA 7. How topical! Basically, anything that used to run off fossil fuels would need to be changed. The reasoning was the planet was running out of oil. The pivot, unfortunately, did not happen quickly enough, however, so as a result, wars and skirmishes would continue to break out all over Earth over the dwindling reserves. So this brings up the question, if we were really pivoting towards nuclear, which if I recall correctly, one man had pretty much already made a nuclear engine for vehicles, and they were about to roll out massive production, or I think we're already in the process of it, why not just switch to like emergency ethanol productions to run those engines while you continue moving away from that resource that is in the ground? Not to mention, corn oil can be used in diesel engines, so one would think that would typically be pushing the commerce and trade. However, this is really not so much a discussion on how it existed during this time frame or why they chose what they chose. I would have been built different at this time and kind of brought up these points, but I'm sure there is a reason the US and China decided not to invest heavily in ethanol while they transitioned towards nuclear versus oil. And yes, I do know corn oil tends to ruin engines, but you're talking about cleaning an engine versus nuking each other into oblivion. I'm gonna go with cleaning an engine. Anyhow, when the planet went quiet, this made virtually everyone pretty nervous as governments would retreat to their bunkers. To quote Black Sabbath, specifically their song War Pigs, "Politicians hide themselves away. They only started the war. Why should they go out to fight? They leave that all to the poor." Classic politicians. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, politicians are not your friends, and you should not revere them in any capacity. And if you do, you need to find a better role model. And this applies to all politicians. Yes, even the one that you think is cool. It doesn't matter who it is. They're a politician. I mean, wow, look at Roanoke being a centrist. He's such a cool guy. For the love of God, seriously, stop revering them. They all suck. Anyways, regardless of my soapbox, all at once, it would happen as it usually does, and the nukes would then fall, catching most everyone off guard. With hundreds of millions taken out due to hits to city centers, the US actually has a system in place known as mutually assured destruction. There is no way to hit the US in so many places at once that we do not get ours fired off too. So if someone, fires a nuke at us for like funsies, right? It is assured that they will face equal or greater issues. It's an interesting idea. Actually, I know B-52 pilots. They have, and someone's gonna correct me because I'm not using the correct moniker, but essentially it's a shotgun shell without the pellets that force fire the engines as they pull forward. Not exactly amazing for the engine itself, but it's a one-way trip, so it doesn't really matter. It's crazy to hear that the pilots are just like, yeah, if that ever happens, I'm supposed to take off, and if my bird doesn't get airborne in time, I'm just supposed to turn off the runway and die. But once up in the air, I hit the target and then I fly around until I'm out of fuel and then die. So, yeah, let's just never nuke ourselves into oblivion. Go Team Humanity, we got this. Trust me, the dub is there, we just need to take it. So with the planet blanketed in nuclear hellfire, because in this alternate universe, they didn't take the dub, the rain that lasted for 4 days after due to the particulates in the air, allowing for water to adhere to the nuclear fallout, which in turn would begin drenching the surface in this radioactive water. Like a supercharged version of the standard water cycle, this would have a few interesting effects. First, this would actually get rid of a lot of fallout that would have just existed naturally on the ground, making the surface actually less radioactive, essentially cleaning some spots in particular, allowing people to survive. However, this would also contaminate the soils, driving the fallout into them and then getting into the groundwater, ensuring that pretty much all freshwater sources are now contaminated. As the highly radioactive waters made their way towards their ultimate destination, the oceans, they would turn a sickly green color, indicating the massive amount of radiation that they now housed. In fact, Greg, pull up a picture of Earth from Fallout. Clearly, as you can tell, the Earth looks sick, but it's still somewhat holding on for the most part. A few million years, and likely it'll return back to its normal-ish coloring with just hellish monsters dotting its surface. I mean, it's not the first time the planet has gone through some cataclysmic event that would alter its appearance drastically. So really, if humanity can persevere through its own stupidity for a while, it may be able to actually live in a fully habitable world once more, but we probably need to start pulling radiation out of the water sources. That's gonna be very important, which I'm pretty sure the chip from Fallout 3 was doing in the Capital Wasteland. But also, what was the deal with not being able to send in the super mutant? God, what was his name? I cannot remember. That was so, I don't want to rob you of your destiny. Brother, yes, go push the button in the radioactive chamber. What are you talking about? So anyways, as this radiation entered the oceans, turning them this color, it would inevitably move into the deeper areas of the ocean, which are known as the deep ocean. I know, shocking. And this is where we currently actually find evidence of human activities known as plastic, which is not ideal. These creatures here would be just as affected as any others when exposed to these high levels. At first, just affecting those located in the shallower waters, we find evidence in some that the body plan may have remained similar, but clear changes began taking place. When we look at the bottlenose dolphins, for instance, their teeth have grown to become more predatory, likely attacking larger game, which they were known to do in their non-mutated form, but essentially they have become the sharks, which I haven't seen evidence of sharks yet, so I'm certain if there are sharks out there, they become worse. But you may be wondering, why is it dolphins appear to have a similar body type while the creatures that we are talking about today do not? And that's a good thing to wonder because let's actually talk about the very likely reason this took place, known as the thermohaline circulation. This circulation is the ocean's, I guess, major current, and it is integral to moving heat around the planet. Warmer waters will actually trend towards the northern and most southern latitudes of the planet, warming those areas, and as they lose heat, they will actually fall due to the changing of their density. Upon getting to the lowest areas of the planet, they will then move back towards the equator, where they are heated up once more, which causes them to rise. This rising will actually pull in more water from the higher latitudes, which are, traveling amongst, or along at least, the surface of the planet, or the surface of the ocean, which is, I guess, the planet's surface, not the surface of the water. And this creates a continuing process, which, is a circulation. So this circulation is intrinsic to keeping Earth as moderate temperature-wise as it is. And actually during the little ice age that happened between 600 to 200 years ago, this is actually likely what caused, in part, all the snow to build up because there was a failing in this circulation. Now, it's pretty much known at this point, or at least hypothesized, that sunspot activity around this time was absolutely flatlining out, meaning Earth was just receiving a ton less energy than usual from the sun. So while the equator and tropical areas were still very much so tropical, this caused the circulation to fail or be extremely weak in the oceans. And this would mean areas like Europe would have absolutely brutal winters and very mild summers. In fact, the US, if I remember correctly, in the 1700s, it was considered to have a year without a summer where it snowed in the Northeast during July. And obviously, albedo comes into effect when you have that much snow covering that many surfaces. Sunlight gets reflected, causing an even further cooling. Not ideal. But you may be wondering how this relates to today's topic. Well, it is highly likely that when the bombs initially fell, the waters were contaminated, as you may have guessed, but initially there was enough energy in the thermohaline circulation where much of the radiation would have been taken below into the depths and into the deep sea. The upper portions of the sea were still radioactive, but the deeper you went, the worse it would likely get. Eventually, the nuclear winter that followed from all the particulates being thrown into the air would likely choke out the energy coming from the sun, which would have caused the circulation to likely stop entirely and then stagnate the oceans. This would also allow for the fallout to sink lower into the oceans, raising the ambient levels of radiation near the sea floor to what is considered to be lethal levels. This would clearly have caused a mass extinction within the ocean comparable to what was happening on land. It may have just taken probably a little longer. But now, something that would begin to happen is gonna take place, which would be horrible. It's clear when playing the Fallout series across all games, deserts are more widespread. There does not really appear to be snow in the Northeast all that often. I mean, you basically, October 27th or something like that, and then you wake up 200 years later. In the Northeast, you can expect snow in late October. And definitely as you continue playing the game, it's clear it is not snowing. So this would likely seem to indicate that ambiently the temperatures are higher. Now, somebody's gonna say, well, it's a game, you can't go by its weather cycles, but there are weather cycles. So I can only cover what I'm shown, and also it's just known that deserts have expanded. So obviously the water cycle has kind of altered to a large degree, which means circulation in the ocean stagnant, which means obviously heat is not being moved around the planet as effectively. All issues. But this is also very likely caused by the fact that the amount of radiation, much like solar radiation, is generating heat. With it being everywhere, you can kind of think of it like heaters running all over the planet all the time. The planet has struck a very delicate balance with the radiation being released, outwards and then drifting upwards and eventually being released into space. But this is a fairly natural process to take place for all radiation absorbed by the planet, but considering what we have done to to the place, it's not as natural for it to take place at this amount, and I guess that's the name of the game, baby. But as this heat drifts towards space, this had invariably caused the atmosphere to heat up, which may explain why no snow is actually seen. And down into the depths, due to the higher levels of radiation, this has likely caused the ocean levels to heat at the surface, and that's going to be causing it likely to be similar in the deep sea as it would be at the top, completely wrecking the thermohaline circulation. As a result of this catastrophic event, the environment has become warmer and the radiation that sunk to the bottom is never distributed elsewhere, and that would have a dilution effect on it if it was distributed, but now it's just pretty much stuck in that area. And so animals that live in the shallower waters, while still exposed to radiation, are dealing with nowhere near the levels of those creatures that live in the deep sea. And with this, we can begin to form the explanation as to what this abomination is doing so near the surface. Life in the deep sea isn't easy. What you are functionally looking at is a desert with the perfect disguise above known as the ocean. Not only that, but the pressures are immense and the temperatures are frigid. This has led to several adaptations amongst the life that lives here. The first and most prominent of these are going to be deep sea gigantism. Deep sea gigantism is essentially a physiological response to the environment that causes creatures to grow larger. This actually leads to a slower metabolism, as a result, causing them also to live longer, and usually their bodies will grow in order to help them retain heat. Which, let's talk about the elephant in the room for a moment. A few weeks back, an anglerfish actually swam to the surface. This was actually a male anglerfish, which they're fairly small. They do this when becoming sick, or maybe they're run up there by larger predators, or possibly they get a little confused and they're trying to mate. Male anglerfish are known to be around 6.3 inches long in freedom units, or in heathen units around 16 centimeters long. For reference, when I talk about which anglerfish I have beef with, that is the female anglerfish. These heifers are around 2.5 feet long, with the largest found to be around 6.6 feet. Everyone tagged me going, LOL, Roanoke, you're afraid of this? Brother, I am right to hate this 6'8" anglerfish. What's even worse is these creatures have bizarre ways of mating. The males, while incredibly small, will attach themselves to the female, basically burrowing into her side, and then fusing with her, losing most functionality. Basically, they just become a pair of testicles. Engaging what is known as sexual parasitism, he will become an irremovable appendage after fusing with her, supplying sperm to create new abominations. I hate it. So imagine for a second, if you will, you're just suddenly transported to the deep sea with a suit that could handle it. And somehow, again, you didn't get totally crushed. In the distance, in the pitch black, a light emerges. Intrigued, you go closer to it as you have no idea what that even is. As you approach, you see teeth, several inches in length, coming into focus. You have no idea what's on the other side of that or how large that creature is, but you have now stumbled across a 6-foot-long anglerfish. While it may not be able to swallow you, it can definitely still bite you.
Was that the bite of 86?
The secondary adaptation also that we screw that, by the way. The secondary adaptation that we think of with deep sea creatures is the bioluminescence that they produce. Anglerfish have joined forces with bacteria to produce this lure that has the same effect on fish as it did just you in this hypothetical scenario. Using this fishing pole-like appendage, this bacteria will actually glow within the dark, attracting unsuspecting fish. Known as an escra, any fish that gets too close will then be bitten in half and swallowed. Now that we understand Roanoke is not crazy and these things are horrible due to their size and even the way they mate, because again, male manglerfish, they might as well be the manglerfish. Male anglerfish, they're tiny, right? Everybody point and laugh. But the female anglerfish, we need to start detonating nukes down there. So anyways, apart from my own proclivities aside, let's discuss their adaptations, as this will help shed light on the anglerfish on the surface. Living in the deep sea is a nightmare, as described, but the bodies of the anglerfish have adapted in several ways. Starting with the most integral, the cell membranes of these creatures are different from those living at lower pressures or on the surface. Anglerfish have what's known as plasmalogens, which are specific type of lipid molecules that allow for their cell membranes to maintain integrity at immense pressures. If you, say, throw a person in the deep sea, their very cells would collapse under the pressure of the water because of the lack of these specialized lipids. These lipids are curved instead of straight, so it's sort of like an arch that actually holds up a bridge. Weight is transferred rather than just straight up supported. At the surface, plasmalogens have a wide flaring shape. However, at high pressures, their tails, or these tails, not their tails, but their tails of like the lipids themselves, will squeeze together, maintaining the necessary sturdy yet dynamic structure for their cell membrane. This adaptation, where the lipids retain the correct shape at pressure, allows for deep sea anglerfish to maintain their proper cell membrane function in their extreme environments. This allows for their cells themselves to withstand the pressure because internally, their bodies do not resist pressure changes like ours do. Instead, their whole body is pressurized similarly to their environment, meaning that there really is nothing to resist. Again, our bodies are not formed this way, so when we try to resist this force, we implode and become a soup fairly rapidly, as in nanoseconds, well, maybe microseconds, like what happened with the Ocean Gate event. But this is why nothing was really ever found, as every cell was basically collapsed of every human being that was on board that submersible being piloted by a PS2 controller, I think. Good God. Anyways, along with this, cells functioning is not enough to prevent these issues, so anglerfish developed flexible skeletons as well, which are primarily going to be formed out of cartilage, which allows them to not break anything at those depths. By comparison, your bones turn into soup. They also lack swim bladders, unlike most fish. Swim bladders help maintain their level of buoyancy based on what they want to do: inflate to ascend, deflate to sink, and due to the pressures that could be harmful having this arrangement, anglerfish really do not have these gas-filled organs, as they may become too pressurized and then burst. As a result, they maintain their positioning in the water through their body shape and by swimming. Something to remember is, based on how deep the water is, this actually becomes quite viable to a fish. To a human though, this absolutely blows. Humans naturally float in the water, but hilariously due to our abdomens, we naturally float with arms dangling, head down, so drowning is a real threat. However, if you go to about 30 to 50 feet down, you hit negative buoyancy, and this causes you to actually have to fight to swim up, as you will no longer float. This is due to water compressing the air in your lungs and abdomen region, and this negative buoyancy most definitely still applies to the anglerfish. These adaptations to the environment in non-radioactive environments clearly show that the anglerfish is a creature that is not only horrible, but highly specialized and adapted to its environment. Once the nukes fell, it's clear this would change, leading them to begin life adapting to new environments. It's clear as the radiation built up in the lower areas of the ocean that this would first expose these creatures to the gene-altering energy. Potentially due to this, large swaths of deep-sea creatures would die off, which I'm totally for. Team Shallow Oceans takes the dub. But invariably, as food dwindled, they would then lead these animals to the areas that they were as they spread outwards, looking for food, as is natural and unfortunate with this creature in particular. As they swim upwards, which anglerfish are already known to do on occasion, they are still dealing with these same mutagenic effects that the radiation appears to have on all species that it came into contact with. And this is done through a myriad of processes, but the main takeaway is indirect radiation versus direct radiation is that's what's at play here. I mentioned this in the other episodes, especially in Fallout, but it's always worth mentioning again in case there are new people here. But indirect radiation will actually heat up the water in your cells and nucleic membranes that then causes the genes to pretty much just break. This can induce mutations quite readily as the body attempts to repair it, which likely it would have to actually repair double-stranded breaks. And depending on location, this can absolutely break critical genes and destroy a cell. However, also depending on the break, this can induce beneficial mutations on rare occasions. The direct radiation utilizing ionizing radiation, and I'm not really sure why I pronounced it that way, such as X-rays and gamma rays, has enough energy to actually remove electrons from atoms, including the atoms that make up your DNA. When these electrons are removed from the DNA directly, it can actually lead to several types of damage, such as the aforementioned DNA double-strand breaks, base modification, and DNA protein crosslinks. Now, while it's clear detrimental mutations are pretty much the name of the game, it is still important to understand that due to the increase in the overall rate of mutation in the anglerfish's DNA, that beneficial mutations could arise, which before we get to that, we need to actually talk about its physiology so that it can kind of highlight some rather interesting leaps in its own evolution brought on by the nukes. When you first find an angler, it's horrible and I hate it. Residing within the swamps and shallow waters of Far Harbor, it's clear when it came up, it had a fairly large jump in its own evolutionary pathway. So you know where we need to start with this one, which is pretty wild for a fish, but here we are. Starting with the feet, we see the angler has absolutely massive toes. It basically looks like fingers. They now have a digitigrade structuring of the foot, meaning that they walk on the balls of their feet. Interestingly, they have these 5 toes in total, which would essentially be like, take their ring finger for instance, just on their foot. It is actually much longer. And this would imply from what we know with humans and many other animals that testosterone during formation would be higher than standard levels. Higher testosterone levels are also linked to larger overall body mass, primarily through muscle growth, but it does actually play a role in bone growth, potentially increasing the skeletal size. And I'm fairly certain, I'm gonna talk about this in a second, but these are female anglerfish given their size, so they're females with higher testosterone. So this structure of the body does hint that overall the testosterone levels within the anglerfish are higher than average, but I also do believe, again, to match up to the potential 6 foot of size that they can grow under standard conditions, that this is, again, it's a female. So as we move up the leg, we see while the feet are large, the legs themselves, at least where the tibia and fibula are, they actually have smaller muscle mass. In fact, they almost sit a bit like a frog would. The thighs are larger, born out of a leaping ability that they have developed over time through their mutations. Moving up to the pelvic region, we see evidence that the tail they once had has become largely vestigial. Basically, the sacral area of their spine is kind of sticking out a little bit, and given its new arrangement and hunting area, this is pretty clear what's happening here. Leftover fins can be seen flanking each side of the pelvis, which are shrinking over time given that they are no longer necessary to be formed. As we move up to the back and abdomen, we see the torso is larger given its original ancestor. The lower body is just not as important, and this is still quite visible as the torso itself is much larger than the lower body is. We see on its spinal column the original fins used for self-defense exist. As then we move down its arms, the fins that were higher up, located what appeared to be on the side of its head, still have the fin barbs left over on its fin, and the bone has elongated into actual arms. As we move down to the hands, we see there are still 4 fingers and 1 thumb, which have elongated, again, massively considering what it used to be. And now on the tips, they have massive claws, which can be used to slash at unsuspecting prey that has moved into the area. Moving back up to its head of this creature, we see it is just full-on angler. While the jaw shape has changed somewhat to become more of an even-shaped mouth, the teeth are still facing backwards, owing this trait to its original predecessors. The teeth are shaped as such that they can hold on to prey, like they clamp down on it so that it could not actually get away, because you never know when you might get another chance in the deep sea to eat again. The eyes are left over as well, and they're quite large, but due to the exposure to the bright surface, they appear hazy, likely to protect the massive retinas at the back of their eyes. A splayed structure exists on the top of the head, which is likely the leftover remnants of the feelers that they originally had that have now shifted in function to likely protect the neck. And on its head, the most clear example of where it came from is going to be the lure. The lure is obviously much larger now and looks like what is actually known as a lure weed. These anglers will actually wait in the shallow waters using the same hunting techniques from its non-mutated form. Whatever animal that may be attracted to the lure weeds will actually see this sticking out and might try to eat it. The anglerfish will then ambush them through methods of leaping, but also through firing incendiary mucus at its prey, which, you know, we have to discuss that. Much like the rest of the angler's body, several other areas have changed function through mutation. Clearly going from deep sea to semi-terrestrial, a lot of things have to change. And I believe what we are seeing is the mutation that took place over millions of years, like according to the theory of evolution, that has happened within 200 years. The anglerfish took a leap from fish to amphibian within a short amount of time. And due to the unnaturally occurring levels of mutations because of kind of what we did, this allowed for the angler to adapt to an environment much more quickly than normal. What took a species an astronomical amount of time through small exposures and successive breeding could now be done within a single lifetime, meaning any beneficial mutations were then passed along much more quickly, leading to a buildup of those traits that, concerning how evolutionary, speaking, normally is going to take place, this was in a blink of an eye. The fish appears to have followed a very normal pathway that has already taken place just at an accelerated rate. As a result, their species developed amphibian-like traits in a time frame that has never been witnessed prior. Looking at their body structures, they actually leap like frogs at this point and exist within the shallow, murky waters. This is fascinating because this isn't just about nature and what is necessary to survive, but apparently these body plans exist naturally within fish to basically obtain amphibian status no matter what, which appears to be interchangeable also. So like look at whales returning to the ocean. The idea is that evolution had fish leave the water, they became amphibians, which became reptiles, which became mammals. Then mammals were like, it's been real, I'm going back to the ocean, which I have no idea why anything would ever want to do that, which then they became ocean dwelling once more. And these became whales. This same pathway is highlighted in the angler, but given that this creature is still from the ocean, it seems to me internal structures rapidly form. First, the hardening of the skeleton would need to take place. Shifting away from cartilage, their bones would become more osseous, meaning it's a bona fide skeleton. Along with this, we see the addition of lungs. Now, where do these come from? As the thermohaline circulation began to falter, the already low oxygen levels of the deep sea began to drop even further, and food began to run out. The anglerfish would then head towards the surface to get more oxygen, and these waters are actually oxygen-rich by comparison. It is likely as levels continue to drop and mutations continue to rise, much like many other fish did hundreds of millions of years ago, a sac-like structure within the digestive system evolved to allow for the fish to gulp air to aid in oxygen acquisition. Over time and through mutations, these structures rapidly took on the functions of what we would call lungs, and we've actually seen these in lungfish. Like, we have never identified the process happening because it takes so long, but it's clear it had to happen once before, and with the anglerfish, it happened again. This allowed for it to exist breathing air. Now it appears new traits can form, but old traits still persist in their body fairly regularly. As a result of this, the gills of the anglerfish take on a whole new function, but still exist in their original form. This trait simply evolved out of the environment that it was located in. The fog in Far Harbor is highly radioactive. This has been known to the locals, but it has had an interesting effect on their species there. First, it drives people insane as people literally breathe in radioactive fallout, whereas their bodies typically exposed to it, like on the outside, they must now contend with it entering their lungs. And this is said to basically come from the fact that the mainland has been hit with so much radiation, and there's a fog that forms over the harbor anyways. So winds carrying this radiation hits the fog, contaminates the fog, makes it super radioactive, and then it comes over the island. But it will actually utilize this fog in a way, it will draw it in, focusing this ambient radiation into its mucus secreted by the gill structure. This gathers up so much energy that it is said to actually be hot, or in this case, burning. It is able to spit this out at prey in the area, hopefully burning them and immobilizing them through these detrimental injuries, I guess you could call them. But much like stomach acid, I believe what protects their own body is actual mucus, providing a barrier from the heat from that radiation. But it's still just as much likely that those who have become ghouls, which seems to be the standard amongst all species, that the anglers may have been dealing with a similar mutation, meaning that they also heal quickly and their body has adapted to actual radiation around them, making them more fit for the environment. But just know that this is very likely, as you do see glowing anglers as well. Also, what they're spitting is concentrated radiation, and then that's being spit at you, which you never want on your skin. The angler evolved rapidly through the beneficial mutations, which likely many species were rendered extinct through non-beneficial mutations. These specific variants were able to move to more shallow waters while actively changing, where they would then gulp air and then they developed lungs. Eventually, this allowed for them to enter the next phase of their evolutionary cycle, which is not assured by any means, but in this case, it appears as though it was, and that caused them to take on amphibian-like traits and then develop limbs. And this allows them to hunt the shallow waters of Far Harbor, basically meaning that these things are murlocs from World of Warcraft. And all I can say to this end is we're gonna have to nuke the planet and just start back over again on the surface, because we do not want these things here. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. My pain of making this video is your gain. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Roanoke Games link. And this basically is where I'm gonna live stream, and all that's gonna be in the description. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronauts. Bananas are epic. Thank you, man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer. Thank you as well, Prometheus. I'd also like to thank our scientists, Dakota 23, Invictus Echo Metric System. Ocean Gate was a cover-up for an anglerfish attack. Truer words, again, never spoken. Official Texan and Stutz. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out, especially during the spring slump. God, it's so lame. Anyways, I just hope you guys enjoy this episode, and I will see y'all in the next one.